Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome to SphinxConnect 2022. My name is Lecolion Washington, and I am the Executive Director of the Community Music Center of Boston. And I'm going to be moderating this amazing panel today entitled New Horizons. And you're going to get an opportunity to see the next generation of CEOs who are really, I think, changing the future of our sector. And so I'm really excited to be able to have a conversation with all of them today. And again, welcome to you all. One thing I'd like to remind you of, there is a ballroom tab that's to the right of your screen. Please know that as we're going through our session, you can ask us questions via the Q&A that's inside the ballroom tab. So we invite folks to ask questions as we go along. I think I'm going to ask some wonderful questions, but I bet that the best questions are going to come from many of you. And so if my questions are super whack, then feel free to put some questions into the chat and we will make sure that those get asked of our panelists today. I want to take a minute to thank SphinxConnect for inviting us all to be here, but also to thank our panelists as well. And I'll begin by introducing them. I'll start with you, Anwar. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. I'm Anwar Nasir, the Executive Director of the Louisiana Philharmonic here in New Orleans, Louisiana. I've been here for about 7 months now, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to come and be asked to lead this organization into its next chapter. So I'm incredibly thrilled and honored to be here.
Thanks. Thank you, Anwar. And DeLashea?
Peace, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm DeLashea Strawder. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm a Black creative and the Executive and Artistic Director at Mosaic Theater of Detroit, where I have been engaged since I was a young person, been involved with the organization since '99, and we're approaching our 30th anniversary. Looking forward to our talk.
Thank you, DeLashea. I'll pass it over to Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Ngan, President and CEO of the American Composers Orchestra. I am coming up on my 1-year anniversary in the middle of February in this role. Very excited to be here. Running an orchestra is not for the faint of heart during a pandemic, but I'm here for purpose and I'm excited for today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Michael?
Hey, Lecolion, good to see you, Boston friend. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Bobbitt. I'm the Executive Director of Mass Cultural Council, which is the state arts and cultural funding organization. I'm also coming up on my 1-year anniversary in a few days. I go by the He series, and I live in Cambridge, which is on the land of the Massachusetts people. Glad to be here.
Thank you. And for those of you who didn't have a chance to read everyone's bios, these are really some amazing folks who have been in the performing arts for a long time. We have everything from folks who have backgrounds in music and dance and theater. So they're bringing not only this background in arts administration, but also understanding the artistic craft in and of itself. So I'm going to actually I'm going to give my first question to Melissa. I'm going to go back to the comment you just made. You said that it's not for the faint of heart. As you think about your role in being a new leader in a time like now where the entire sector is evolving, how do you see yourself playing a role not only in your organization, but also in the way that the sector is moving? How do you see yourself playing as an important role from your position?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that I would have taken a role with an orchestra at any point before the pandemic occurred. 17 years ago, I founded my own organization because I saw a need out there for really understanding the role of musicians out there in the world beyond performance and education, and really out of a desire for advancing the power of the creative act as a form of transformation. So at the moment when everything happened, where we started to realize that looking backwards was not an option, I actually had an opportunity to take my first full-time job interview in my career. It was my first job interview in 16 years and my first, role like this that I've ever been in consideration for. And the reason why I said yes to that conversation was because ACO is an organization that is really positioned to help the field redefine itself through the lens of the composer, to really advance that as a creative force in helping our organizations decide and reimagine who we are in relationship to our communities and what our purpose is. And I felt like this was a moment when, you know, everyone's brains are a little bit more plastic because the business as usual is not even accessible to us at this point. And also that we're at a moment when representation is #1 top of mind for orchestras across the country. And for them to be able to accomplish that goal that should have been top of mind for such a long time, we need an organization whose primary purpose is the discovery and development of those voices, so that that creative pool is strong now and into the future. And so I saw a real opportunity to come in and have an impact, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to stay with orchestras and go over to Anwar. Anwar, you know, down in Louisiana, that orchestra, I know that it has such a relationship to the community in New Orleans, but also around the state as well. And so I was wondering if you could give us some thinking on how you view your role as a new leader in really building on that community-based perspective of an orchestra, and how it, you know, more than just what happens on stage, it has this broader responsibility to its community. Can you talk to me about, tell me how you think about that, and again, how, and from your position, you believe that the ways in which you're navigating it might be models that other institutions and other orchestras might be able to use?
Indeed, that's a fantastic question, and I think, you know, for us here in New Orleans, but, you know, and even within the state, is that the orchestras in their communities tend to be of service, right? Their role and function is to be of service, whether it is to the art form, whether it's to our counterparts at the ballet or the opera, or even to just having a role in musical education. We know that many of us growing up had a strong foundation where there was music in schools. And as time has evolved, the first thing that tends to get cut is arts funding. So one thing that I think that we do really well, and not we as in terms of the Louisiana Philharmonic, but we as orchestras, is that we find a way to persevere and say, we know that this music is important. And we know that music instruction is important, whether you're going to be a future musician or whether you are going to be an instructor. But, you know, we're creating productive members of society. We're learning how to work together. We're learning how to work as a group and really show up for each other in ways that are really special. You know, one thing that I found in my few months here is that this city, like many places, but that we've had a lot of struggle and strife. There have been plenty of challenges. We're in a place where, you know, hurricanes like to come in or the weather gets tough, and we have to find a way to soldier on. You know, and I realized when I got on the ground here that there's so much that people lean into and understand. Like, you know, I would go into restaurants and there would be a marking on the wall that say, this is where the water line was in Katrina, right? But the place has found a way to soldier on, to really come together and say, we're going to support each other and we're going to be here for each other. So how that relates into what we do from a music standpoint is we say, we need to show up for folks as much as we want them to show up for us. And that's getting our musicians out, that's getting our board members out, that's getting our staff out, and really saying, we want to get this as far and as wide, and say, maybe it's not orchestral instruction. Maybe it's just music instruction. Maybe we're just bringing people together to celebrate the musical tradition. And what I think is really fantastic about landing here in New Orleans is that I don't have to convince people to like music, right? It's through and through. It's everywhere. You know, I could throw a rock and I hit several musicians. I don't advocate doing that. Don't throw rocks at musicians, but it's everywhere and it feels really good. So it's a part of our culture, and we just have to find ways to highlight that. But there is such, you know, there's 300 years of orchestral tradition right here in our community, and it has lived and breathed and evolved. And what I think we're really focused on into the future is saying, all right, well, maybe it's just we're going to turn this on its head and look at things a little bit differently and say, okay, well, how has this evolved? How can we tell these stories? And how can we just think about highlighting what the future looks like? And the role that we play in that is constantly evolving. It's constantly looking to do something different, which I really love, and it gives me a real sense of purpose.
No, thank you. I'm gonna now pivot over to the youth serving and youth supporting and youth partnering space with my colleague DeLashea. You about that life, and that's what I know about you, and I respect everything about the work that you do, and I'm glad that you are starting to be recognized nationally as someone who has some of the answers and is really engaging in youth work as it relates to doing youth work very differently and in a much more engaging way. So I would love if you could just tell us a little bit about, from a big picture perspective, how do you even think about the role that young people play in you driving your vision forward or creating your vision as it relates to this kind of next generation of the sector?
I think that's an interesting way to frame it, because I don't see it as my vision at all. I see the opportunity that I have to be a conduit to bring folks together as an opportunity to lift the voices or amplify the voices of young people and the imagined future that they have for all of us, because they want so much better than we have given to them, and than we are creating for them in this time. And so I think largely it's really about making sure that we are accountable to one another as humans, and they're just, smaller versions of humans with very big ideas. There's so much for us to learn from them in the things that we think they are impacted by, as well as those things that we don't tend to consider them in. And so oftentimes I'm listening in order to be able to provide the space and opportunity for them to share their gifts, their ideas, and experiences with the world.
No, thank you. You bring up some really important points, and I'll pop it over to Michael as we think about this idea of just deconstruction. And so thank you for the reframe. I appreciate that. Michael, and I want to pivot a little bit to philanthropy and some of the deconstruction that I know that you have been speaking about as it relates to nonprofits and philanthropy and the ways in which philanthropy supports the community. And so I would love to maybe you can give a little bit about when you think about deconstructing the things before trying to find solutions. Let's just interrogate the things themselves. And I've seen you do that. It relates to the makeup of boards and the like. And so I'm curious if you can just give me some of your thinking as it relates to kind of deconstructing the thinking that we have used to navigate the work that we do in our communities.
Yeah, well, first I want to say that I don't know if I was sleeping, but I don't remember the chapter in arts management school on pandemics and racial reckonings and political unrest and the deterioration of the climate. I missed all those things, but here we are. And all of that is informing how we need to progress forward. I mean, we need to deconstruct. We know that there are so many things that we do in nonprofit, which also includes the philanthropic community, that have been based on best practices that aren't serving what we do right now. But sometimes we don't use the skills that we have as artists, which is our creative minds, to know that we have the ability to see the future. We can open up a laptop and see a blank piece of paper, or grab a canvas and envision something and then make it happen within a few hours. So part of the deconstruction is to know that oppression, racism, all those things are creative tools, right? To keep someone from getting something. So if we want to deconstruct, we have to use the skills that we have, which is creativity and imagination. So in philanthropy, which is just racked with a bunch of best practices that came from philanthropists that have been part of the world, there are a couple of things I'm doing to really look at how we do our grant making. One is to look at it from a racial equity point of view, to really think about the most marginalized communities, and how do we need to make our grant applications and guidelines and follow-ups to benefit them the most. I think about like the person who's running the African dance company, who is also cleaning the toilets, writing the grants, doing all the paperwork, choreographing the dances. She doesn't have time to sit down for 6 hours and write a grant. She got an hour. So how do we design the guidelines and the process so she can get it done in an hour and be able to get the grants? And the great thing about that is that that's sort of thinking about it also from a customer service point of view, that our grantees are our customers and our grant applications is the product, right? I mean, the grant's the product, but the grant application is the customer service tool to get them to the product. And so how do we make it easy? I think of it, when we go to the airport, the checking in at the airport is easy with those self-check-in machines, which is why most people are using it. But think about going to the grocery store and self-checkout at the grocery store. It's so hard, right? Which is why we still go to tellers. right? So how do we think about it from a customer service tool? And then how do we think about, again, the most marginalized? So some small things like, do we need to require financials? If you're coming to us applying for a grant, you need money. Do we need to do site visits? Do we need to do a final report? You know, can we just trust that you're going to spend the money the way you say? If English is not your first language, we should not be grading the grants on the mastery of English and the quality of the writing. Also, can we have audio submissions or video submissions so that everyone has the chance to sort of have a successful grant applications? But we're looking at dozens and dozens of things like that to really deconstruct, specifically going back and reverse engineering it from a racial equity point of view and a customer service point of view. And what I hope is that we can get more historically underfunded communities in our system and funded.
No, thank you. Thank you for that, Michael. I think that you are speaking to something which is the kind of the next section of the conversation, is starting to name the problem. I think that each of us, we oftentimes come into institutions that are wanting to fix a problem without naming the problem. And I think that is that tends to be a challenge. I know, you know, some organizations are existing inside this frame of white saviorism, which is a problem, right? Because if you're viewing a group of people as having a deficit and you're trying to save them from something, right? That is a saviorist perspective, right? Which is very different than what DeLashea spoke to, which is we're amplifying voices here. And I'm not here to save you. I'm just here to amplify, because the answers already exist in another space. You know, and so those are some things that institutions are thinking about. When people are thinking about diversifying, they're not saying that homogeneity is a problem, right? like that's a problem to be solved for. Diversity is the solution to that problem. Having that much power in one group or one type of groups of people can be problematic, especially if that group is thinking about it from a perspective of privilege. So as I come to you all, and I'll open this up to any of you now, what are some of the things that you have seen that is the problem? If you were going to name some of the problems that you are solving for in kind of a meta perspective, what, you know, and of course, you know, racism, sexism, you know, those are clearly things, but I'm wondering if there's some other things that you're thinking about in your own work where you're like, actually, this is a problem that I am solving for. And I'll open that to the room, to the group of four. Because it was a breeze, I didn't want to pick on somebody. Please.
Really, it's about equity of opportunity. And I think about that very holistically. There's a quote or phrase that says nothing about us without us. And so there are a lot of the conversations and decisions are being made in rooms that don't represent the folks that decisions are being made for or in order to impact. So how do we get more folks at that table that can speak to their own lived experiences and what they feel like they need, as well as what resources they need to get there. But then also, you know, to even challenge that, do we need to pull up seats to those tables? Should we be creating our own tables? Just some questions that sit with me often.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear that. Yeah, if it takes you that long to recognize my existence, maybe I should just start places that do as part of their DNA. I hear that. Michael?
There are a bunch, but the two things I will say is that I think that the lack of acknowledgement, one, and the second thing is fear of pioneering. So on the lack of acknowledgement, I want to just say that if an organization out there is predominantly white, it has to acknowledge that it was designed to be that way. It didn't happen by accident, right? It was designed, the business model was designed by white people for white people. And so if people want to become diverse, it has to be redesigned by multicultural people for multicultural people. And that requires a series of actions to make it happen. The second part about the fear of pioneering is that, as I mentioned before, racism is a very creative tool. If someone wants to keep someone away from something, they have to sit down and come up with ideas and figure out how to do that. So it stands to reason that anti-racism also has to be creative. And many people just don't want to pioneer and think about new ways of making sure that people are included. As a person of color, I will tell you that one of the things that makes me a person of color is art and culture is inherent in who I am. And so if you want to like expand your audiences, there's a wealth of people that you've never invited into the space that might spend money and come in and experience your stuff. So there's where you should put your innovation and your creativity and your marketing dollars and your outreach, because that is one of the things that will help you. But also just making sure that you are really sitting down and going. And the other thing I would say is, and maybe this is a gross over exaggeration, but I think artists tend to have a hard time taking their beliefs and turn them into actions. So we all believe in equity, diversity, and inclusion. We all believe in anti-racism, but what are the actual action steps you're going to take to make those things happen? And that's where you have to spend time. We get stuck in educating. Everyone's educating their boards and educating their staff, and then they don't come up with a plan that has like, here's the 10 things we're going to do. And here's how we're going to measure them. And here's how we're going to share it with you that we've done this. And then after you do that, tell the world so that you're being held accountable for your actions. So those are two things I see happen a lot.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. But thank you for that, Michael. There's so much in there. I'm gonna circle back to a few things that you shared, but I want to hand it over to Melissa.
Yeah, I just want to underline a few comments that Michael put in, and specifically just getting at that idea of creativity. You know, one of the things that many of us identify with is that we may have come into the world as classical musicians or trained as artists in fine art or in some kind of way. And, you know, there's something in that training that tells you that you have to know the answer, and not knowing the answer means you are not prepared. And creativity begins with a beginner's mindset, and it requires vulnerability to come into a room and say, I don't know the answer. I need your help to figure this out. But that's ultimately what collaboration is about. That's the definition of collaboration as opposed to cooperation or compromise. And so when we come into these positions of, you know, being in a place to be able to resource, design, administer programs, there's a certain aspect of how we come up in the world as classically trained musicians. And I can say for myself as a recovering orchestral piccolo player, that's definitely a pressure I have felt, that we have to feel vulnerable and comfortable enough to say to people, I need your help in designing this. And that's how we get to DeLashea's comment, nothing about us without us. It's not that we need to come up with that on our own. And I think that, you know, again, with what Michael was saying, you know, there is a very real and lived history in terms of how music making has had an enormous part of our human existence. So in that idea of showing up as your human self and being vulnerable in that way, there's also a recognition we have to make that there is no indigenous culture on earth that didn't have music making and artistic ritual as part of the core of how it engages spirituality, how it heals its people, how it brings community together, how it teaches, how it shares language and story and passes that along. And so for us to be in a place where we're having all of these high-level intellectual conversations and creating studies about whether music or whether art making can be effective in those ways means that we've really come off our center. So I think that for us to be able to allow ourselves to reintegrate that art making and that human experience is something that, whether we're in a leadership position or performing on a stage or wherever our role is in the continuum, and I will include in that people who would be otherwise deemed as audience members, but I hope would be participants and co-creators along with us. I think it's important for us to recognize that it is a communal experience that we are making, and that's the biggest power of what we do.
No, thank you for that. Anwar, is there anything you want to add in there?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about balancing out the sense of power and where that lives. You know, I think that what we have within our organizations, and Michael talked about this, is that it was built to serve a certain thing, right? Or it's built to have a power within those who give us money, get to dictate, they get to be on the board, they get to say, this is going to be our mission and our vision. And when we want to shift that, this is where it needs to live. But what we're learning is that there has to be this shifting of thinking about, well, maybe, and this is just kind of through line from what Melissa mentioned, is that we're in a space where I have to be able to say, I don't know everything, right? But that's really hard for a lot of people to let go of that, because a lot of the people that have been in those positions of power did not get there by being vulnerable, right? Their job was to come in and conquer and say, this is what I'm doing. This is where we need to go. And if we do something differently, then that's incorrect. And it's a very fine line for us to be on, because I end up in a space where it's like, you know, I'm stepping into this role very, very newly, having challenges with getting folks to understand, like, you've hired me to think about things differently. You have to give me the authority to actually do that kind of work and to be able to challenge you when I think that something is not correct. And that's a very hard pill for some folks to swallow. And my job is to be able to, you know, kind of coax them through that process, say it's going to be okay, we're going to get through this, we're going to try some things, we're going to fail along the way, but we're going to learn while we're doing it. And know that you don't have to be at the center of all of that, right? So my job is to be able to step into the room and say, all right, this is where I think we should go. How does that feel, folks, right? Like, tell me what's working for you, what's not working for you. How can I help you get to where we all want to go collectively, and understand that maybe my way is not always the right way. Your way is not always the right way. What we need to do is make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction, that we're getting where we're trying to go. But that takes time. And it's a really, really hard thing for, I think, folks to accept sometimes, but understanding that we're just trying to do the right things for the right reasons and just go forward as an organization together.
No, thank you. It's something Michael came to. I was teaching a class at the Laundry School, Disrupting White Supremacy in Arts Organizations Through Transformative Leadership. Super dope class. I was co-teaching that class with my consulting partner, Nikki Dufashard. And it was just like, it was a great class. And one of the things that Michael said, as he was quoting Ibram Kendi, maybe you can say it, the heartbeat of racism is the heartbeat of, you remember that? Do you remember that quote? You don't remember it. Okay. The heartbeat of anti-racism is confession. And
well, yeah. I mean, that's one of the steps that if you, I should come back to me. I'm going to find it because I know I have it.
No, I remember. I put it down. The heartbeat of anti-racism is confession, and the heartbeat of racism is denial.
Oh yeah, right.
And so I appreciated that, and I walked in that for weeks afterwards. It rang true that you can tell what kind of space you're in, right? If it's a space of denial, if it's not a space of confession and a space of denial, it's kind of naming itself by its behavior. And so I appreciate that's why this idea of naming. Before I get to a question from the chat. About naming what the thing is that we're solving for, and being able to name what the problem is. So I thank you all for that. And
I mean, in all those mini 12-step programs, the first thing is you have to name it, put it in this space. You can't like start fixing a problem until you name it. And you know, the idea of denial, which means that people are saying I'm not racist, right? There's no such thing as that in my mind.
Right.
Like, you know, if we believe that racism is a system and a structure and an institution, then you can't be white in this country and not benefit from the system, the structure, and the institution. So there's no such thing as that. So your choices are racist or anti-racist. And if you're going to be anti-racist, it suggests that you have confessed, you're educating, and then you are taking steps to fight this system, the structure, and this institution. So I could go on for hours and hours and hours about that. I can go on for hours and hours and hours about boards of directors, Anwar. I mean, we don't have enough time.
Well, I do want to get to one of the questions from the chat, and I invite others to join the chat as well, and send your questions to us. But this is a question. The question, I'll read it directly. Initiatives fueled by terms like BIPOC often perpetuate marginalization. As leaders in the field, how do each of you engage the conversation of equity as it applies specifically to Black people? And I'll go on top of that by saying that oftentimes the lumping everyone together like that, it ends up leading to anti-Black policy making. Right. And so I do want, I hear that question loudly and clearly. So I will ask, how do you all, engage in the conversation of equity and this conversation about BIPOC without perpetuating the marginalization that naming that sort of thing can create? It doesn't, but it can create that type of marginalization. How have you done that, Anwar?
Sorry, I have a fire alarm going off, but I think that for me, it's been coming up all the time is like, let's name what it is that we're trying to say, right? If we're looking at developing a program that is aimed at increasing Black representation or increasing Indigenous representation, like, let's just say it. Like, we don't have to have a fancy acronym. We don't have to try to lump folks together. Like, let's just call it what it is and stand behind it, right? There's nothing wrong with trying to solve an injustice if that's what we're trying to do here, and actually calling it out. I think for me, it's being very intentional with the work that you're trying to do and standing behind that, right? We're not going to have all of the answers, but if we say there aren't enough Black people in our concert hall, there aren't enough Black people on the stage, and in New Orleans, we're a majority minority city, right? So there are more Black people in the city than there are anyone else. Right. So if we say we want more we want our orchestra to look more like the people in our community, we have to say we need more Black people on the stage. We can't say we need more BIPOC people on the stage, because that doesn't solve what it is that we're trying to do. So I say lean in on the intentionality with it. As long as it's coming from a place where it's not offensive, then you have to do the right things for the right reasons.
No, I think that's beautiful. I lived in Memphis for a long time, another predominantly Black city. And I would say all the time that if you walk into a place and there's no Black people there, that's by design, because mathematically it shouldn't be able to happen, right? You walk in a place that's got 50 people in it or hundreds of people in it, and you don't have Black people there. Like, the law of probability would say that that couldn't be possible unless some outside force is acting upon that thing. There's some outside force that is making that happen, because law of probability would say that it's unlikely. So I think that's a beautiful comment there, and thank you for that. Anyone else want to jump in on, kind of the challenges with thinking through, before we get to some questions about philanthropy, Michael, because there's several questions in the chat related to philanthropy. I do want to open it up to our program leaders. Anyone else want to talk to us how you navigate equity and the conversation about BIPOC and how that can be a marginalizing way of navigating it?
I tend not to use the term, and I show up as my entire Black self anytime I enter a room. I name, even in our introductions, that I am Black. I'm a Black woman. And when we're having the conversation, in my community, it's very much so a question of who all over there. And then once we get there, can we have the conversation about who's in this room, who's not in this room, and what we need to do about that if we're really trying to create change or be a part of change, as opposed to just be a part of speaking on change.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you. Thank you for that. I have a couple of questions as it relates to philanthropy, and we can maybe respond to these from both sides, from the side of philanthropy, but also for those of us on the other side of philanthropy who are receiving funds. The question here is, how can we ensure that philanthropic organizations are committed to long-term efforts to fund BIPOC artists and organizations beyond the current cultural moment where it is popular to do so, where it's a good thing right now to be trying to fund organizations that are run by people who aren't white. Like, that's a trend, but how do we turn that trend into something that is the system? In which that actually becomes something that is systemic in philanthropy. That's the way I'm understanding the question here. So Michael, I would ask you to speak to that. I would ask for us to actually speak to that as well as those who are on the other side of philanthropy, reaching out to philanthropy for resources. Michael?
Well, I think it requires making sure that it becomes part of the culture, so that, as Mass Cultural Council's first Black leader of the agency that's been around for a long time, making sure that it's part of the culture is my job, so that when and if I go, it still exists as part of the organization. And I think culture is one of those esoteric words that we use that people don't know how to turn to action. To me, first of all, you have to put it out there. We don't fund as many BIPOC or Black organizations as we should be funding. So let's state that. Let's make sure we know the facts, and let's start fixing that by making sure that our grants and every single part of what we do is not contributing to why we aren't funding more people of color, Once we do that, we have to go out and make sure we are building relationships with the community. So at Mass Culture Council, we've hired BIPOC outreach coordinators whose job it is solely to go out there and start making connections with the communities and introducing them to us. Then we can hear from them about why they aren't applying. What is it about our applications that we need to address to make sure that they are applying? There are some challenges with that. Some people will say, you know, I've never gotten money from you, so I'm not going to try. It's not even worth it. And I go, but I need your help. The other part of it, and when I talk about the cultural shift, you know, if we've named the problem and then we start talking about what kind of culture we want a culture of anti-racism, culture of equitable funding, a culture of transparency, a culture of taking care of the people that work for us. What are the things we can do to assure that that culture is practiced? So once you name it, you have to start thinking about what are you doing to make sure it happens. And for me, culture is the heart of it all. I think we have to be careful of programs and policies to address the historically marginalized underfunding, because that won't stick if the culture is not there, right? To me, it's like if you have mold on your wall and you just pull out a can of paint and cover over the mold, right? So discount tickets aren't going to fix your racism problem. An outreach program is not going to fix your racism problem, right? So rip that wall apart, figure out where the mold is coming from, repair that, put it all back together, and then paint it. And then you have something that is going to stick around and be part of the organization forever and ever and ever. But that's the big thing. Culture actions to assure the culture is happening so that it becomes infused into the minds of everyone working. And then we don't have to think about it so much because it's happening automatically. As we are looking at putting together our panels, we are making sure that there's at least 50% representation of BIPOC people on the panel. I know in the classical music world, blind auditions are a big thing. To me, that's the opposite of equity, because equity says, I'm hiring you because you're Black, because you're a person of color, and you haven't had the chance before. Blind audition says, nope, we're all fair, right? It's been fair for all of us, so we all have equal opportunity. So those are kind of things we have to think about to make sure they're infused into the culture, because then they'll become second nature, and then we have the perpetuation of supporting BIPOC organizations forever.
No, thank you. And please, DeLashea.
I'd add that we have to commit to being in community with one another. I think one of the things that I benefited from as I moved into this role just before the pandemic is that I didn't know any better. I didn't know that there were things that I couldn't say. I didn't know that I was supposed to try to hide my dirty laundry when I was having conversations with our partners. This is what I'm dealing with. I don't have all the answers. How can we, if we're on this journey together and we're both trying to make sure that young people in our communities are seen, heard, supported, and safe, how can we do this together? Because my resources are limited. And so in doing so, when things have come up that have rubbed our organization and the people that we walk with the wrong way, I've also had an opportunity and the understanding that I could say that too. And I understand that that's very, very scary, considering that, you know, there's certainly a power dynamic there. But if we continue to play by the rules of a game that we don't think should exist, then we continue to perpetuate the same problems over and over again.
No, thank you for that. I wholeheartedly agree. And those of us, and we have to realize those of us who receive funding, we're also in positions of power. Because we actually have the ear of philanthropy, right? And so then what do we do with the power that we have because of our proximity to philanthropy? Are we trying to assimilate into what is, or are we part of the process of guiding philanthropy into seeing some of the things that we're experiencing and connecting philanthropy with the things that maybe they're not seeing? Some of these organizations, to Michael's point, you know, organizations that are out there, you know, like how do we play a role in that? Anwar or Melissa, have you played a role in thinking about your philanthropic partners and being partners with them as they evolve as well? And if so, how have you done that? Melissa, I saw your head nod. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I will say that, both from the perspective of having served on grant panels and also being in active conversation with any of our funding partners, it's really an opportunity to help understand through the learning that happens from the organization who's receiving the funding, how the philanthropic perspective can be widened. And one of the things that is challenging, as I mentioned when you were asking the question about what are the biggest challenges you're solving, is that from the perspective of a grant seeker, you're often thinking, how can I best show how successful this program was, or all of the grand plans that I have moving forward, when it's often sometimes as important to talk about the things that didn't work, what you learned from that, how you're addressing that concern that you are seeing. And oftentimes that can be the start of a conversation around how something can move forward differently. So I would definitely encourage people to do what DeLashea said and have the courage to show up as themselves in that circumstance, and to be able to help the philanthropic community see from the ground up what you are seeing through your eyes.
And yeah, I would say for me, I try to be very intentional with not going after funding that is earmarked for organizations that are Black-led or BIPOC-led, whatever terminology they may be using at the time, because I realize that I might be taking up space from someone who may not have been able to get it before, right? And I would rather go after funding that is program-based and not just based on who I am as a person, right? Because ultimately, if I drop dead tomorrow, then the funding is going to dry up for the organization because we're not doing the right work. So I try to really make sure that I'm focusing my energy on things that are really based on the work that we're doing in the community, as opposed to me as a person. As much as I would like to, is if it's simple and easy, then it's not going to be lasting. So really trying to make sure that our organization is thinking about things more holistically and not just going after the low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Thank you. Please.
One last small little thing I'll add. Last year at SphinxConnect, I heard David Stahl from San Francisco Conservatory say something which I thought was really apt, which is that if you want to have a program around for the long time, you have to fund it with your dollars for a long time at the inception, which I thought was a really great observation and something they were really able to accomplish well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. So a lot of the conversation in the comments and in the chats who are coming now about how you all lead. I think we're getting a good sense of how everyone thinks. And so now folks are really interested in how you lead. Like, what are the things that you do, actionable things? So one of the questions here is, how have you as a leader balanced education versus action? Especially in your institution? That was something that was talked about before, but not only actually think about it from a tactical perspective. How have you found a balance, and maybe name some actions that you have taken that would be recognized as legit things for your institution? So I will open. Why don't I go? I'll go back to DeLashea, because your new actions are relatively new, because you've only been there you're new in your role. So I would love it how have you balanced education versus action?
I don't see them as mutually exclusive. As a creative being in the artistic process, you're always making new discoveries. And in order to do that, you have to act. You have to do something in order to learn more about it and to learn more about yourself. So what that looks like day to day is that we're asking questions about, with our team as well as with the young people we get to walk with, what did you learn today? What are you hoping to learn? Are some of the questions that we often ask, and then we follow up. Where are the areas that you feel strong? Where are the areas that you wish you could build more strength, and then work toward that together. In terms of our relationships, it's about, again, having authentic conversations about what it is that they desire to see happen in community, what they would hope we would do, or how they would like to collaborate with us in order to move that effort forward, or even to see where there's alignment. And if there isn't, to, for lack of a better term, bless and release. I think that too often we try to hold on to things for the sake of holding on to them, and that isn't in service to anybody but our own egos.
Yeah, Michael?
So one thing to note is that sometimes education can be an obstacle to action. A lot of people out there that want to know everything they can know about anti-racism or racism before they will start actions. And you need a double PhD to learn everything you can learn about racism or anti-racism. We have to move to action much faster. So one of the rules I have is that every time we leave a conversation or learning around racism or anti-racism, we all walk away with at least one action, one or two actions. That's the remedy for just being stuck in education. Every time you leave a conversation, what is your action? And then I think, again, it's part of making it part of the culture of the organization. So like at staff meetings, on the agenda is always something around anti-racism. In everyone's job description and their evaluations, it is advancing racial equity goals of the agency, and then an evaluation. What have you done to advance the organization's goals? And your raise or promotion can be tied to the work you've done or not done. On our monthly all staff meetings, we save time for learning, and then we have follow-up questions about actions for each department. What are you doing based on the learning that we did? But make it part of like the culture of the organization. So it's something that you are practicing on a regular basis, because I just know some organizations, they're now in their third year of learning about this stuff. And also, like, we spend all this money on hiring consultants, which I think some people need, but Google is free, everyone.
Right. I hear that. That's church. That's church right there. And you know, I would say here at our institution, I think I mentioned this on some other thing. For me, it was trying to get my board to a point to where they knew enough to approve a lot of things they didn't understand yet. Right. And so that was an important thing for us to get to. And it was actually quite early on in my process, because I was real candid with them when I got the job. I was like, listen, if you just want to hire my black face, I'm not the one. But if you about that life, I could be the one. Y'all get to decide, right? In this process. And so there was some education there. But I think on the tactical side, we actually had some metrics as it related to board slates. So our board slate, we were like, whatever our current racial demographics are as it relates to non-white people, like the non-white percentage has to dip down every time we bring in a new slate. So if we were at 30% non-white, then now we got to be, this next slate's got to be better than 30%. If, you know, and so then the next, now we're at 38%, the next one's got to be. And so we have been kind of gradually moving ourselves to there. I do know of a board that didn't take any more white people. I did not go that route, but that was one of the things that we did in a tactical way to try to. So for those who are asking for actionable things, it was something that was a gradual way for the board to think about itself as a body.
Can I just offer one little tip when it comes to board recruiting and prospecting? That if your board has agreed to the culture of anti-racism as part of your organization, then when you are recruiting board members, and if you choose to recruit white people, it should, again, advancing anti-racism or advancing racial equity goals should be part of the board job description and certainly part of the interview process. So you should be asking board members, especially white ones, what have you done in your life to advance anti-racism or racial equity? Tell me about the significant relationships you have with people of color. Open up your photo app on your phone and let me see. Because again, if we're an anti-racist organization, we're not bringing people on the board that haven't even opened the book or have no relationships out there. That's again part of building the culture.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of culture, there's actually another question in the chat that I want to get to. Can you give some examples of some positive, sustainable cultural shifts that you have either seen or led? Some cultural shifts that you have seen or led? That's a really good question. Melissa.
Yeah, so this speaks a little bit to the question that was just asked, and another one that I see in the Q&A that's about musicians and all of this. So, you know, one of the things that I will say is that there's sometimes in orchestral settings a separation between musicians and management, right? And people are sometimes afraid to have that conversation directly. They're guarded about what they say. They're really nervous about that relationship. One of the biggest things that I've noticed is that the ability to be clear and direct and open and engage the conversation constantly, consistently, and with clarity has been one of the things that has allowed our organization to move the ball forward on a lot of the questions that are being asked here and laid the groundwork for that to occur. So, you know, there have been some real structural things that have adjusted in our organization, and to be able to have that conversation with clarity and to say, with naming what they are, what the issues are, and not be afraid to include the musicians in those conversations and lean into the discomfort that happens when we do that. I think that some of what we deal with is that people feel that having those conversations slows things down. That may be true, but it's often worth it, because we have to recognize that every organization is made of people. And so it's a people first mentality. And the second thing is that every action comes from a belief system or a value system. So if we take the time to understand where everybody is at in that process, I think that's kind of what our previous comments have sort of pointed to, a number of ways of understanding where people are so we can know the path they need to walk in order to get where they need to go. So, you know, in terms of change, what that really suggests in terms of where we're headed next is being able to look at reframing the nature of our CBA. We're looking at a new personal manager who is coming on board with a mandate around what we are looking to accomplish in terms of skill set and diversity on our roster. And we're also in a position to be able to have that conversation very directly with our musicians. So it's all done out in the open.
For me here, it's really interesting because our model is really different. We're a musician governed organization. So they're the corporate members of our board. So that we're collaborating, you know, day in and day out on much of the decision making that's happening. And we had a very interesting time when I came on board because there was a new board chair and a new orchestra president. So the three leaders within the organization all turned over at the exact same time. So we kind of locked arms and really thought about, okay, well, how do we want to lead and how do we lead from our respective positions? And it allowed us to really think about, like, let's just make sure that we're all in on the ground floor, right? And there are going to be disagreements that we're going to have, but we all have the organization's best interests at heart. So really just constantly checking in with each other and saying, all right, well, if we want to do something differently, this is what the path forward needs to be, and really establishing what that looks like right from the beginning. For me personally, it's really thinking about what kind of culture do I want to model, right? So if I want to be in a space where I want to be able for people to listen to my thoughts, my opinions, that I have to also do that with other people. I can't just come in and say, I'm the new executive director and you got to listen to what I say and what I do, and this is how we're going to do it. It's just say, well, tell me more about this. Help me understand your thought process in terms of the decisions that you're making from your position, and how can I help support you get the things that you need to get done, right? And that really helps folks understand that, one, I care about what it is that they're thinking, two, that I'm here to support them, but three, it gives me an opportunity to really say, have you thought about it this way if I don't agree? Right. So it's a different way of me coming in combative and saying that's not the right decision to make at this time. It's just thinking like, all right, well, I see what you're hoping to accomplish here. Help me understand it. Maybe we can reframe this and start to think about it from a different perspective. But maybe also I'm learning as well, because I know that I don't have all of the answers, and it gives me the opportunity to say, we're in this together. I want to learn from you as much as I want you to learn from me, and we're just going to push this forward.
No, I appreciate all these various perspectives. We talked a lot about things from the perspective of being humble and being flexible, being collaborative. That's such an important part of this work, while also keeping the ball rolling, right? And I think that as leaders, and to the conversation about education versus action, it sounds to me like we're all in that. We're like, listen, we want to be part of. We want to be part of this, but, we want everyone to be in it. But, to DeLashea's earlier point, blessing and releasing sometimes maybe is one of the things, to be mindful of as an option on the table as well. There's a comment here that I want to make sure I lift up as well. Can we address the idea and the concept that change is slow? She says that this individual says that they find it hard to believe this concept is still present, even in these pandemic times. But there's this, a lot of folks are saying, well, change is slow. We've got one. It's going to take us another 15 years before we get to 1.6 as an average, And so I'd love to get your perspective on the idea. This may be one of our last couple of questions. about the idea that change is slow. We've got about a few minutes remaining. So please, what do you think about this concept that change is slow? And I have a quote I'll share later, but please, anyone have any comments on, please, Melissa?
I'm going to say this from the perspective of someone who built a career in chamber music and then moved into orchestra very quickly. And I think that one of the biggest things that I heard coming into this role is don't try and do too much too fast. It's going to take a lot longer than you think. The machinery is da-da-da, all of this kind of thing. And while I recognize and did my very best to learn all of the structural reasons why that might be the case, I never put myself in a position to say I accept that. You know, and I think that in the moments where you have the ability to understand what levers you need to pull in order to move it forward, and the moments when you have to say, this is a moment that's not about conversation as much as it is about me saying, this is within my authority to do, and I'm simply going to do that today. It's the wisdom to know the difference between when to deploy those two methods of conversation, and a unwillingness to accept that the status quo needs to be the same when you enter your role.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one in our last couple of minutes here?
I think change is change, and it's not that people fear change. People fear loss, and so when you can identify the loss that people are fearing, then you can sort of start really actually affecting change. And also, too, if you're going towards a culture that's different than the culture that you currently have, if there are people that are not on board, it's just say goodbye. Just say goodbye to them. They don't have to stick around. I do want to sort of talk a little bit about some of the creativity around action that I've used before, because I like to leave people with some action ideas. So from an operational perspective, what about a racism incident report? Similar to our accident report, how about our incident report? So they can all be documented. If you are selling tickets to patrons, at the point of purchase, similar to the ticket policy, have them click a button saying, I agree to these community anti-racist agreements. That way you're teaching your audiences you're walking into an anti-racist organization. Get rid of subscriptions. They're racist, my friends. They give privilege to people that already have privilege. Stop doing that. Get rid of tiering donors. You're giving privilege. You're giving more to people that already have privilege. From a board perspective, if you have an EDI committee or DEI committee who has no power, give them power. Give them veto power over board decisions, especially when they come down to racist actions. This is the kind of pioneering and creativity that we need to have in our organizations to start really pushing us towards true anti-racism.
No, thank you. And in our closing moments here, I'll just share that any space that is saying that they're recognize that change is slow, that is their privilege talking. That is the only perspective that comes from. That only comes from a perspective of privilege. I was at the Americans for the Arts Conference several years ago when they were planning to release their statement on equity, and there was someone who I'll never forget her standing up, and someone said that this was a Black woman, and she said, you're saying that you want to move slowly, and you're saying change is slow and that we have to be patient. She's like, listen, I'm in my 70s. I've been waiting for a long time. I don't have much more time to wait. Right. And so hearing that from her perspective was really, really powerful for me. And I've always thought about her, because who's thinking about her when we're saying that change is slow? Right. Who's thinking about the marginalized in that moment? And to me, that only speaks to the perspective of the privileged. That is for whom the change is too fast. And so, again, in our last couple of minutes here, I want to take a minute to thank our panelists. Wow, what a wonderful conversation. If your thinking is leading the future of our field, the future of the field is in really, really great hands. And I just want to thank you for your time. And I also want to thank Sphinx for having us all here and letting me invite some of my friends to come and be part of this session as well. Some of you I got to meet, some of you I've known from before. And so I'm really glad that we were able to share our perspective with this community today. And I would love to give you all 10 seconds to say, a final goodbye to our community before we sign off. And I'll start with DeLashea.
Yeah, feel free to reach out if you want to continue the conversation. I'm here for it.
Thank you, DeLashea. Michael?
What side of history do you want to be on when all this is said and done?
Thank you. Melissa?
Show up as yourself. And if you need a little pep talk, email me anytime.
And Anwar?
For me, it's always biased towards action, in any scenario.
Thank you all. This was church for me. I feel not only inspired by you all, I have learned quite a bit, but also excited for the future of our field. And again, I want to thank you all for taking this time, and I want to also thank you all for showing up as well. We appreciate you all for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference. There's some great sessions happening today, so I hope you will check them all out. I know I will. But thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.